No need to eat a meal because traditionally you have eaten a meal, or because somebody says it's good to eat a meal, or it turns on your metabolism, or some other reason like this. Don't take any notice. If you're not hungry, the body doesn't need any more food. Remember, what we're trying to do is use up the store of food that you've put away over many, many years. We have to eat less than what you need in order to use up that store. So if you wake up in the morning and you don't feel like breakfast, then don't have breakfast. Just have a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, a glass of water. That's fine. And then you go on to the next meal time, which could be lunchtime. But remember, you're not to eat between meals. You have to restrict your eating to those meal times. The second part of the rule is to have small meals. And by small meals, I mean small meals. I mean the amount of food that you could get into half a cup. This is a measuring cup, and it's a half a cup size, and that's the amount of food that you should have at any one meal. Now, it's not a measure so much as a concept, because I'm thinking about compressed food. A lot of food is very loose, very voluminous, and obviously to measure that half a cup as loose food would not be appropriate. It's a compressed food, but that's the amount of food that I would want you to have at a meal. It's a very small amount. In order to make that not look silly, I want you to use a small plate and small fork and small spoon. Just by the mere fact of using a small plate and small utensils, you will eat less. Even if you hadn't had a band, you would eat less. But make sure you put your food onto a small plate. On a large plate, it would look ridiculous. And then use a small fork, and this is an oyster fork. It's an ideal size for a bite of food after the band. The second rule is do not eat anything between meals. When I say 3 meals a day as a maximum, I mean 3 meals a day as a maximum. And anything between a meal is another meal, and that's not allowed. We want you to avoid any snacks, any little breaking out. Those little snacks between meals can be the most harmful of all things in preventing you from losing weight. Now, if you're hungry, if you're in the yellow zone, you'll get hungry between meals and you'll be looking for those snacks. And that's a signal that you've got to come to us and say, I'm in the yellow zone. I think I need more fluid, and we will talk to you about it, and we will generally agree, and we will generally add more fluid to try to get you into the green zone. So if you find that you are looking for food between meals, talk to us about it and see whether we need to do an adjustment. In the meantime, before you do come to see us, if you are going to have a snack, don't do too much harm by having bad food. Try to have good food. Try to have a piece of fruit. That would not create a lot of harm, and that may well satisfy that hunger. Don't eat a chocolate bar or cookies or crackers or other things like that. Try to stay with something healthy. And then come to see us early and say, hey, I need some help. Rule number 3 is to eat slowly and stop when no longer hungry. Eating slowly is probably the most important of all of the rules. It's so critical to getting a good result that I want you to become obsessed with eating slowly. Eating slowly comes in 2 parts. It means chewing well, and it means waiting after you have swallowed to allow the food to go through. I want you to enjoy the food, and to enjoy it you need to taste it, consider its textures and flavours, and that means chewing it well. But also, I don't want you to swallow any lumps of food. I want you to break the food up in your mouth into small particles so that you never swallow a lump. If you can't break a piece of food up and it stays as a lump, I don't want you to swallow it. You have to spit it out. But generally, if you pick the right foods, you can break them up into small particles within the mouth by chewing them very well. Think about it, take your time, enjoy the food as it's in your mouth, and then when it is broken up into small particles, you can then swallow the food. Now, it's important to understand what happens when you do swallow the food, because it will pass from the mouth down the esophagus down to the band. Before you had the band, it would pass down the esophagus by a series of squeezes that the esophagus does. It's a muscular tube and it squeezes the food down, a process that we call peristalsis. This squeezing will take the food down to the lower end and then it will go straight into the stomach because there is no resistance if you have no band there. But when you have a band there, the food will go down to the lower part of the esophagus and then it will have to get squeezed across the band. And let's look and see how this is happening. This shows a bite of food passing down and being squeezed across. And you can see that squeezing or peristaltic waves trying to get all of that bite across. And it's taken, in this case, 3 squeezes to get it across. We know from our studies it will take between 2 and 6 squeezes to get a single bite of food, a bite of food that you'll have the size of an oyster fork, that you've chewed well, you've swallowed. It'll still take between 2 and 6 squeezes to get that across the band. That takes time. We know that it takes between 30 seconds and 60 seconds for that to happen. And I don't want you to swallow any more food until that one has gone through completely. And therefore, I want you to wait a minute. After you take that small bite of food, after you chew it properly, you swallow it, you put the fork down, and you wait a minute. And by a minute, it should be gone through, and then you can have another bite. I don't want food building up above the band at any time, because that will stretch that area, and then you will lose that sensitivity that's so important. We'll watch that coming through again. See how it squeezes it across, then takes it a bit more, squeezes it across, and then finally it'll get it right across. If you take too big a bite, this is what happens. Instead of using that oyster fork, you've used a large fork, and you see how it stretches that area out? We don't want that stretching. If you stretch that area, it will start to lose the sensitivity that it wants. It'll lose the ability to squeeze the food across the band, and then you can start to get into trouble. So you must only have the amount of food that you can get on a small fork or a small spoon. If you eat more than that at any one bite, there is a danger that you would stretch it. The other thing you can do that's bad is eat too fast. If you eat too fast and the second bite comes down before the first bite has gone through, you can see again that you've stretched that area. And that stretching will mean the brain is getting fewer of those signals from those nerves that I showed you earlier, and the ability of the esophagus to squeeze the food across is reduced, and the effectiveness of the band is therefore reduced. So